Hi, I'm GM Matthew Sadler.
And I'm WIM Natasha Regan. Welcome to the fifth video in our series on AlphaZero opening strategies. In this video, we're going to look at AlphaZero's handling of the white side of the Tarrasch. In it, AlphaZero swaps off the dark squared bishops and then changes the pawn structure to get a pawn structure with 3 pawn islands, and then alternates its play on the light and dark squares.
So AlphaZero's handling of the position actually brought back difficult memories of a very, very difficult defence in the Tarrasch that I played against Vladimir Kramnik. Kramnik's strategy in that game was, well, very difficult to deal with, and actually very, very similar to what AlphaZero does in this game. So we'll have a look first of all at Kramnik's game against me from 1998. Then we'll have a look at the AlphaZero Stockfish game, and actually we go right through the whole game into the ending, because there was a very, very interesting ending moment at the end, and a miraculous defence by Stockfish to hold the draw. So, hope you enjoy it. So, the game starts in this fashion: d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c5, c takes d5, e takes d5.
This is the Tarrasch Defence. It's named after the German player Siegbert Tarrasch, who was one of the strongest players of the late 19th and early 20th century. It's a very active defence. Black goes all in for a central fight, accepting a weakened structure, typically an isolated queen's pawn, in return for open lines for all of the pieces. Tarrasch apparently proclaimed, "The future will decide who has erred in estimating this defence, I or the chess world."
Yeah, I mean, since Black commits to the centre very early, there are unfortunately, quite a substantial number of liquidating continuations that lead the game into quite sterile equality. So it's not great for, sort of a last round must-win situation against a weaker player. But against stronger players, I think it's a very effective weapon. I've drawn 3 times with Black against Vladimir Kramnik, with a couple of pretty good positions as well, and also drew with Vishy Anand with Black. So it's definitely a good opening. I mean, I definitely believe in it. So the game continued. Both games continued, actually. My game against Kramnik and also the game against between AlphaZero and Stockfish, with this variation: c takes d4, knight takes d4, h6, and bishop e3.
This is one of the main lines of the Tarrasch, and this was the specified opening up to move 12 in the ECF Book. After this, then both engines were on their own making up moves.
And so we're going to have a look first of all at my game against Vladimir Kramnik. And so White played. So I played rook e8, rook c1, and well, here Stockfish played bishop e6. But against Kramnik, I played bishop f8, which is actually the main line. What Vladimir Kramnik did was he was a little bit surprised I played the Tarrasch. I'd never played it before. This is the first time I'd ever played it. But he chose a very simple plan, which was to, first of all, to exchange off the dark squared bishops. Now, if you look at Black's pawn structure, the isolated queen's pawn is on a light square. And the dark squared bishop, Black's dark squared bishop, defends the dark squares around it. So it makes sense to remove that bishop and to leave Black only with a bishop that can defend the pawn and not defend the weaknesses around it. So I took off and went rook c8. It's a tactical defense. If knight takes b7, then queen e7 will be fine. And here Kramnik played a decision that surprised me somewhat, but as we'll see, it's also a decision that AlphaZero made very easily. That's to take off the bishop on e6, and this leads to a change in the pawn structure. Now you might think that it's a little bit odd to do this. Black had an isolated queen's pawn, and then you're taking off on e6 and supporting his pawn. But it introduces different weaknesses into Black's position. First of all, Black finds it's harder to use the outpost on e4 created by the pawn on d5 because the rook's no longer on a half-open file. And of course, when the pawn moves from f7 to e6, then g6 becomes weak. Actually, all these light squares, kingside light squares, are quite weak. And Kramnik came up with a very easy plan of development, whereas I was struggling to really understand what I was supposed to be doing. So Kramnik did this nice regrouping. The rook came to d2, covering the f2 square. The queen came back to d1 just to add a little bit more protection. And then Kramnik started restricting my knights, taking away the g4 square first of all, doubling on the c-file, and then this move. And this move is rather unpleasant. The knight is coming either to d4 or, as in the game, to f4. From these squares, these dark squares, the knight attacks the pawn on e6. From f4, of course, the knight will also attack the g6 square, which is rather sensitive for Black. So it's rather difficult. I put my knight on d6, which covers a number of squares, but doesn't really address the problems. And as you see, White's also got control of the c-file as well. Black's still solid. Black's still hanging in there. But it's not an easy situation. So here Kramnik suddenly started playing on the dark squares. I've got some weak dark squares on the queen side, with my pawns on b7 and a6. For example, b6 is a little sensitive. And then this move, which caught me rather by surprise, but is extremely strong. The knight moving now away from attacking light squares, moving to d3 and wants to move into e5. And that would fork the queen and the rook.
This looks like an unpleasant position for Black to play. You played it at Monaco 1998.
That's right, yes, indeed.
And that was a tournament where it could be blindfold games and rapid games.
That's right,
What's the story behind this game?
This one was the rapid game, actually. So I actually had a horrific time in the blindfold games. I think I lost my first 6, whereas in the rapid I was doing quite well. No, I lost without hope against Kramnik in blindfold. But in this rapid game, I was in reasonable form, and I managed to hold on. But there was quite a bit of good calculation in it from my side, but there was also a great deal of luck because I missed a number of moves, but sort of managed to balance on the edge of a precipice successfully for a number of times. So Kramnik kept on teasing the dark squares and then got this position. And if you look at it, White's got control of the c-file, a knight on a beautiful position, threatening knight g6, and, well, a plethora of plans. Kramnik just decided to expand on the king side and also increase the power of his bishop. He played it first to the h3 c8 diagonal, and when he got fed up with that, he decided to put it on the b1 h7 diagonal and brought the knight into g6. Rook d7, rook c7. I mean, I of course, I had the feeling I was being completely outplayed all the time, but I held on. Knight f4 gave me the opportunity to come here, but I'd well done some calculation at least, saw that I could still just shield away my my weak pawns. H5, king e7, king f1. So Kramnik's going to bring round his king to e2 and play f3 to chase me away. I held on for a while, but here actually Kramnik made a big mistake. The move, I think it was going to be, knight takes e6, followed by f4, would have been a rather unpleasant way to spend some time playing this position. So I would have had a really rough time like this. But instead, Kramnik went, no, that was right. It was rook d1, and now he could have played knight takes e6 as well. That was the same trick. Knight takes e6, rook takes e6 and f4. And, well, I'm just going to suffer, in actual fact, very nastily. I'm going to lose my d5 pawn. But I'm hoping that I can hold the resulting position. Kramnik played e4. And after knight f6, all of a sudden I was organised. I was just about ready. And after bishop g2, knight d7, this was the key. E takes d5, e takes d5 is check. So white isn't winning a pawn, and after knight b6, I'm perfectly well organised. Actually, I'm completely fine. So it's a very lucky escape there. But as you can see, I suffered enormously during the game, and all of these themes that Kramnik found, doubling on the c file, attacking my light squares, then moving to my dark squares, very, very unpleasant to play. So let's have a look now at what AlphaZero did against Stockfish, because you might well recognise quite a few of the same themes. So rook c1, Stockfish played the unusual bishop e6. Normally what human players do is to go bishop g4, h3 and bishop e6, reasoning that with the pawn on h3, white won't have bishop h3 attacking the pawn on e6. But, well, probably Stockfish sees that that's not too much to be worried about, and so he doesn't really bother about stopping it. And after bishop e6, yeah, straight away AlphaZero decides that this is the structure that it wants to play. It's really quite striking, you know, no hesitation whatsoever. And plays knight b5. Queen d7, knight d4. So that knight, again, is moving to a dark square and attacking e6. I mean, Kramnik put it on f4. AlphaZero is putting it on d4, but the idea is just the same. So Stockfish didn't want to exchange off knights, but we see the same thing happening. AlphaZero exchanging off the dark square bishops. And after knight d6, starts doubling on the c file. And you see that Stockfishes end up with the knights on the same position as I did, f6 and d6. Well, Stockfish plays a little bit more coherently in defence, neutralises the c-file a little bit by exchanging off rooks, and also grabs some space on the king's side and stops white from ever putting a knight on f4. So that's pretty good. And now a manoeuvring phase starts, where AlphaZero simply encroaches square by square. Queen b4, this move that Kramnik played again, you know, just attacking dark squares and putting pressure on there. e3. And then this move, knight f3. You know, when I played, I had a queen on f7 and rook on d7, and that was a signal for Kramnik to put a knight to d3 and come into e5. Stockfish puts the queen on d7 and king on f7, and that's the signal for AlphaZero to play knight f3. So Stockfish played e5, and I mean that's fine. It's stopping the knight coming to e5, but it's loosening the position because the d5 pawn is weakened. So we're now going to see some protracted manoeuvring. We see that Stockfish absorbing this. It looks so dangerous, but Stockfish has calculated that it can still exchange off rooks. But at the same time, AlphaZero putting its queen on a good square. And every time Stockfish seems to come a little bit forward, AlphaZero chases him back and adds pressure. This is quite a nice little sequence. a5. So pawns have been tied down on light squares, and white's got a light squared bishop. So that's rather unpleasant. If this centre ever gets opened, if this light squared bishop gets into the black position, then this could be curtains on the queen side. So AlphaZero, again, playing around on the dark squares on the queen side, just like Kramnik did. Queen b3, and now it takes the next step. It plays b4. So protecting the pawn on a5 and also giving white the possibility of b5, opening up a little bit of space on the queen side. Knight e4, queen b3. I mean, Stockfish doing a great job keeping things together, exploiting tactics too. For example, knight takes c5 would allow queen takes f2. Queen c2, knight c4.
Stockfish is defending well. Stockfish has stopped white occupying e5. That has had the cost of loosening its centre, and its pieces are aggressively placed, so it's an active defence, but they are fragile, and AlphaZero finds a way to make the foundations even more shaky. Yes,
that's right. Everything's hanging on this d5 pawn, and that d5 pawn, well, since the blacks played e6 to e5, it's not well defended. So this move, knight h2, came in, and then e4. So essentially, White wants to leave Black with an isolated queen's pawn on e5 if Black takes on e4. So Black played d4, protected past pawn, but now there's a great square for the White knight on d3, in front of a pawn, attacking e5 and also looking at the c5 square. First of all, AlphaZero tempts another pawn onto a light square. So that means that there's going to be light square targets on the king side as well now for a light squared bishop. Bishop f1 to drive the knight back, and queen c5. AlphaZero occupying the dark squares again and attacking the pawn on e5. I mean, it's quite amazing how at different stages in the game AlphaZero is attacking first of all on the light squares and the dark squares and the light squares. You know, basically Black's got weaknesses everywhere, but Stockfish keeps it all together. Bishop e2 attacking the pawn on g4, queen c7, king f8. Now AlphaZero could trade the e pawn for the g pawn, but doesn't particularly want to do that. AlphaZero is much keener on leaving that g4 pawn as a future weakness and maybe getting to the e5 pawn. So played knight d3, knight f6, queen c5, knight e4 and queen c5 and h5. So what's the result of this position? I mean, amazing that Stockfish has managed to keep the material balance, but what we've got, the position has opened up, which is great for the bishop, and a6 b7 and g4 h5 are on light squares. So Black's really got to be careful, because if the bishop gets into the Black position, it's curtains in the ending. So AlphaZero optimizes its pieces, places them on slightly better squares. This is a lovely square for the knight for the moment. f4, attacking the pawn on h5, tying down the knight on f6. Bishop g6 check is also an idea. King e7, king f1, king e2, knight d8. Stockfish, very clever. That knight is coming round to c6 to attack the pawn on b4. So AlphaZero shuffles again around. Bishop g6 and then knight d3. AlphaZero didn't want to take on h5 when the pawns get liquidated. It wanted to keep the tension in the position and try and get this bishop on g6 round to c8 without giving away this pawn on b4. So king f8, king e7, bishop c8. So it's really getting into a crisis moment now. Knight d5, bishop takes b7, knight takes b4, and here. A really great ending, actually. I thought that that this probably should be technically winning. After all, there's a weakness on a6 and weaknesses on g4 and h5. The one difficulty that, well, White's got a number of difficulties. I mean, first of all, this pawn on a5 is on the dark square, so if the knight manages to attack it, then it will be able to win that a5 pawn. The knight on b4 and pawn on d4 are stopping the king from coming in. And also, on the king's side, it's the wrong coloured rook's pawn for the bishop. So if White has a light squared bishop and a pawn on h4 left, then that's actually a draw. So there are some technical problems, but I thought that White should maybe be able to be winning here. But Stockfish finds an incredible defence. So AlphaZero plays around. King moves to the queen's side, supporting knight c6. AlphaZero moves to the king's side, bishop g6. Now, if Black plays knight a5, then bishop h5 is very dangerous. The bishop takes the pawn on g4 and then the h-pawn rushes. And this is very good for White. But Stockfish plays an amazing defence. Knight e5, bishop takes h5 and king e7. And the result of it is that the bishop on h5 is kind of trapped. On h5. And what Black does, Black keeps its king just around that area, stopping the bishop from escaping. There's only one thing that White can do, and after trying a few little possibilities, AlphaZero goes for it, and that's to play the move f3. So just a little bit of feinting, a little bit of shuffling around, and then this move f3. And I mean, this looks very, very good. Stockfish plays the most precise move order. just using its d pawn to be as awkward as possible, to give white a little knight check. Obviously, bishop takes c4 would allow d1 queen, king d3, knight a5, king d2, and now this stunning move, knight c6.
Here it looks like white can play bishop takes a6 and have those running g and h pawns. But actually, after bishop a6, black can play knight d4, and this is a table-based draw. The reason is black is threatening knight f5 to take off the pawn on either g3 or h4. And if bishop goes back to d3, preventing that, then knight f3 check, and then knight takes h4. And if the knight's recaptured, then it's a wrong colour rook spawn and it's a draw.
That's right, and it sort of gets saved by one tempo, because after king f4, king g7, the knight's got a square on g6 to escape. So because I'd like to try and capture this knight with a king and keep a g pawn, but yeah, knight f3 check is good. So AlphaZero tried to make things work by playing bishop d1 and leaving the a pawn, but this is actually never going to work because the a pawn is too big of a distraction. And here a4, for example, bishop a4 would again allow knight f5 followed by knight takes h4. So a4, king d2, a3, king c1, knight c6, king g7. The king is too far away. Knight takes h4, threatened again. Knight h4, two h-pawns even lead to a draw. And in this position, the game ended in an honourable draw with a stalemate. Bishop takes g6.
Nice.
An epic game, in actual fact. I hope you enjoyed that. I mean, I hope you... I was really impressed by... well, when Kramnik ground me for all those moves, I was really impressed by what Kramnik did. And yeah, I mean, I was also very impressed by how AlphaZero did it, because obviously Stockfish is defending much better than I did. And AlphaZero was still able to put Stockfish under enormous amounts of pressure. It's a very simple plan, but obviously this defence from Stockfish in the ending was extraordinary, and I spent many hours analysing it, but it really does seem to be a draw. It really does seem to hold. So anyway, I hope you really enjoyed that. I hope you've got some ideas now for handling the white side of the Tarrasch, and well, keep watching our videos because we've got lots more planned.